Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And of course, I have a fantastic guest with me today. He has an amazing story he's going to share with us. His name is Alain Dumonceaux, and he is a purposeful action mentor for the Awakened Man movement and host of the Revolutionary Man podcast, who is on a mission as the beacon for what it means to live an authentic life. For the past 3 decades, he has lived the highs of the Culinary Olympics to the lows of losing it all, almost twice. Today, Alan's purpose is to guide men to rediscover their life's mission, starting with a purposeful action plan called The Return of the King that sets the stage for their hero's quest. Alan, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Cheryl, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it too. And there's so much, we need to unpack here. But first of all, if you could even just explain to the listeners what the return of the king that sets the stage for their hero's quest, what does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, years ago, when I was going through everything I went through, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that, one of the things I recognize is that while in business, we create mission statements and vision statements,
Mm-hmm.
how often do we do that in our personal life? And
Mm-hmm.
so, and so as I started to do men's work, one of the first things that we did, and it just kind of happened organically, I had 10 gentlemen join me in this as this beta test group. And we walked through a process of uncovering the things that we would normally just think about, but not
Mm-hmm.
really put any action towards. So we
Mm-hmm.
started to look at some energies, the king, warrior, lover, and magician stuff. So a lot of work from Douglas and Gillette's work. And then we started, once we understood, like, how is it that we're showing up, and why is it that how our emotions are being, how we're using them or not using our emotions. Then we started to look at things like, well, what do we truly value in life? And so when we start to unpack and looking at values, then we can start to look at, well, what about those beliefs around those values? What are the limiting beliefs specifically?
Mm-hmm.
How are we holding ourselves back? And slowly, as we started to work through these different processes, ultimately, what we ended up by doing was crafting a mission statement for our lives. And the nice part about that is that when you have a mission statement, you now have the ability to put purposeful action towards it. And so ultimately they create it was 10 lesson module. They create this this mission statement. I take them through a bit of a meditation practice as well. And then they have something that they can look at every day, and they
Mm-hmm.
can ask themselves, how can I show up intentionally to achieve that mission? And
Mm-hmm.
so by doing that work, then we have more of a reason to do things, a reason to show up. And we get into some pretty deep stuff when we're doing this work, because the things that, especially for guys, we're not really great at unpacking our stuff. We're really good at stuffing things down and not sharing our emotions or sharing things that are important to us. And so when we started to do that, where you could see light bulbs turning on
Mm-hmm.
all over the place, and they recognize that, really I really excel in one aspect of my life, but I'm not great in other parts. And so when they recognize that, I could be a better father, or I could be a better husband, or I could be a better community leader,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that they were lacking, it was able for them now with this mission statement to really come and show up differently. So, as you know, in business, mission statements aren't about a task necessarily, but it's
Mm-hmm.
about a vision, or what you're aspiring to become. And so it's really about taking that idea and keep bringing it from a future tense into a
Mm-hmm.
present tense. And so you have some purposeful action steps that you can do, that you can apply on a daily basis.
Mhm. So was this then your first step toward creating the Awakened Man movement? With those 10 guys you got together, did you ever think that it would blossom into what you're doing right now?
Yeah, I think, absolutely, it was the catalyst. I hoped it would,
Hmm.
and that was part of the reason to do the work, to do that work. But I didn't anticipate that it would be as fun as it is today, as
Hmm.
endearing and fulfilling as it is today. And it just continues to get more and more popular. I think men's work today is really having a resurgence from really in the late 80s and 90s is when it first started to come out, and now you're seeing that more and more guys are reaching out and looking for help. This
Mhm.
idea of being this lone wolf, I'll do it on my own, brother, is not really a successful record for us to move forward. And so I think to see how it's starting to really pick up momentum coming
Mhm.
out of COVID now and people starting to get a little bit of traction, I'm really excited that we've created space here for people, and
Mhm.
we do it online as well.
Mhm.
So, I have guys in the group that are all the way from, I'm in Canada, so all the way
Mhm.
from the West Coast right through the prairies where I am. So I'm really proud of the groups
Mhm.
that we have coming out.
Well, congratulations on that. And I love the fact that I'm seeing this now, since of course I've been podcasting for a while now, and I've been meeting a lot of guys, through the podcasting networking who are doing that and creating these spaces for men, and to see men supporting each other like that and coming together really gives me a lot of hope for the future. And it really heartens me because my experience of just as an outsider, standing and watching what's been happening since, maybe like the 1980s and 90s, was that there is so much man bashing and so much marginalization of men. And even in a lot of the stupid sitcoms and TVs, it's like the men is the caricature and
Mhm.
not really the kind of a role model that you think that men could be. So it's really giving me a lot of encouragement to see men coming together and creating these groups.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we talk a lot about that, about, in another area, another module that we talk, I have is called really that it's in their identity, and it's called the man box. But we talk about how that has changed over the years. You have that father figure of like Michael Landon, in Little House on the Prairie,
Hmm.
this strong masculine guy, had real great presence, to Homer Simpson.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Homer gets more laughs.
Hmm.
That tends to be the idea or what we need to live up to. And if it's not that, then I'm a child of the '80s, so it was Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone every year with some action figure movie, and you had to be jacked and you're carrying massive guns that who knows what they're out to, and shooting aliens, and that's the other side of that spectrum. And so when we look at where we are today and where things are going, and let's face it, the Me Too movement was probably a necessary piece for a short period of time, but unfortunately, it's painted a pretty wide brush, and the
Hmm.
brush has been too wide. And there are men that rightfully so needed to be managed better, and
Hmm.
and what happened to them needed to happen. But to make that as being had to go from that to being toxic masculinity, I don't really believe
Right.
in toxic masculinity. I believe that there's toxic behaviors.
Hmm.
Masculinity is an energy. It's how we show up. That can be in women and or men, just as men
Hmm.
have feminine energies, and we look and lean into being that nurturer, as this
Hmm.
father figure. Again, you go back, you think of that Michael Landon, how he was. He still had that soft hand when he needed it, but also had the firm hand when it was required. And I think that's what we struggle with as men today. We
Hmm.
have lost the idea of what it means to be men.
Hmm.
And I think it's no fault to our fathers. Our
Hmm.
fathers did the best that they could.
Hmm.
And today, with the internet, the podcast, there's no lack of understanding. There's only a lack of desire to want to become better. And I think as we continue this path forward, we're going to see men and women come together and see that we're not so different after all, and that we both want the same things out of life. If
Hmm.
we can stay and get into that position, I think we're going to see much better things for our society.
Mhm. I'm glad you brought up the Me Too movement, and what I'm going to say is probably going to be somewhat controversial, but I'm sorry if it is for some of the listeners. I apologize, but I do believe that the Me Too movement just like it was took off like a runaway train and dragging bodies with it along the way, and it got to the point that it was, you have to believe all women. And maybe some of those women were not telling the truth. We're people too, just like men, and sometimes we are not completely 100% honest. And I think it was just the opportunity to marginalize and minimize even more the man's role in the family, in society, in the community. So yeah, it was just one of those things that I would just listen to some of these things that were being reported, and it's like, wait a minute. What you're actually doing is then marginalizing and minimizing a woman's experience who did
Yeah,
was violated. So it was just really a crazy, crazy time, but I think it's definitely lost traction.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Completely agree. I think the difference today is that more people are waking up to this effect, right? And as I just said, I think when we recognize that we have more in common as
Mhm.
people than we do that separates us, and it all depends on what perspective you're coming from. It
Mhm.
goes back to this. I talk a lot about being intentional. Is your intention to look for division, look for differences, or is your intention to look for how are we similar? There's always going to be differences. I'm not saying that there aren't any. What I'm
Mhm.
suggesting is that there's not so much of a divide
Mhm.
as in some aspects of society that would like to create that.
Mhm.
The idea of that men are no longer needed and is really a bad thing. I think it's really scary to think that way. I think we
Mhm.
need both. We need
Mhm.
women, we need men, we need us to come together as a group versus saying one side saying that, well, I don't need, we don't need men. And there's got, the incels are not any different. That group on the men's group who are choosing to not have anything to do with women. Well, those are two choices. And
Mhm.
if as a society we move forward that way, how will our communities evolve? How will we grow? How will we ever evolve as people? And I think when we stay in those types of extremes, I think that's a very dangerous place to be. So it's much
Mhm.
better to be arm in arm,
Mhm.
moving the needle
Mhm.
forward and helping people get to that next phase of their life, as opposed to looking for the differences and saying, well, I can't really associate with you because,
Mhm.
well, you're a Democrat, I'm a
Mhm.
Republican, or whatever you want to use to
Mhm.
divide yourself. Instead, look at what's the common good for all of us.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think, in my own personal opinion, a suspicious person like myself, might think that there is an objective behind that, dividing us, separating us, keeping us apart. Because I got to tell you, I have some fantastic conversations with guys. And if I, was told, no, if I bought into that mindset that no, men are the enemy and they're evil and they're wicked and they're toxic, it's like, well, that's not been my experience my entire life. So why would I think that now? And again, I would be limiting myself to so many incredible friendships and relationships that I've got right now. And that would be so sad.
Absolutely, it totally is. And I think some of what happens with that and why we come up with these ideas or these frameworks is because of our experiences in life.
Hmm.
And one of the things that we do, we spent time doing last year. Every year, I have a theme for the year to really wrap all of the work we're going to do. And last year was all about connection. And I'm going to tell you, we went from Thursday, February, being about the masculine in relationship using G.S. Youngblood's book. And then we talked about the invisible presence in May for mothers and talking about how, as guys, we haven't really detached. And so when you take an opportunity to reflect and realize that our positions that we have, the beliefs that we have, the values that we have, how many of those are borrowed from
Hmm.
outside influences that we've now embodied into ourselves because of the environments we were raised. And I'm not saying that those were bad environments. What I'm saying is that we can no longer look back and say, well, this is how I feel because this is what happened to me when I was little. And uh, and I think that that's a sad place for people to be in. And so when I hear the talk about dividing and people separating, is I think about how wounded that person is, and
Mm.
what can we do to what if that's a guy, what can I do to help him find that wound
Mhm.
and really be with it, so that we can integrate that pain and we can move through that pain. Because what's happening is it's preventing him from becoming the best version of himself, the best
Mhm.
father, the best husband, the best leader. And so it's no different working with women. It'd be the same thing. It's like, I totally get that, maybe they were raped as young when they
Mhm.
were young and they had really horrible things happen. And we don't want to diminish that, but what we also want to do is make sure that how do we support them and help them through that as best as
Mhm.
they can, so that
Mhm.
they can show up healthier for
Mhm.
themselves and then for everyone else.
Mhm. And well, since you brought up the topic of wounds, um, okay, let's go there. Because I know that you've had your own experiences, and the fact that you were in television for 30 years, 3 decades, right?
No, not television. I was in culinary work, doing kitchens and that. But I was in the Culinary Olympics, and that's long before there was anything cool like Bobby Flay and
Yeah.
Iron Chef and all of those. And so I was inspired through the cooking shows that I grew up in, the era that I grew up with like the Galloping Gourmet and
Hmm.
Graham Kerr and all of that. And but I have to tell you, as exciting as it was to be competing in the Culinary Olympics and in the early 90s and winning medals, the other side of that coin is pretty bitter, because the other side of that coin, it cost me my family. It
Hmm.
cost me everything I had. Up to that point, I was married to my high school sweetheart. We had two very young preschool children, and when everything fell apart, like I said, I lost it all. I lost her. I lost my home. It was bankruptcy, and I went through about 18 months of depression. Now, I didn't really recognize it at that time,
Hmm.
but as I've done my work, I can see what was happening to me and what was going on. And so I
Hmm.
struggled with through that time frame of really trying to understand how can somebody be so successful in one aspect of their life and then have the rest of it just fall apart. Well,
Hmm.
that happens because we don't put the same kind of energy and attention
Hmm.
elsewhere. And that's where it comes back to this doing this values work. If I say that I'm a family man and that's what I value, but my actions show that work is the most important thing and I work 20 hours a day, and
Hmm.
I'm even though I'm home at night, I'm still on my phone or I'm answering emails and I'm totally
Hmm.
disconnected. What do I truly value?
Hmm.
And so when I started to do that work and doing lots of really self-esteem work, I can remember I picked up Jack Canfield's cassette series. Now I'm really dating myself. From Nightingale Kona, to six cassette set of self-esteem and peak performance, and I wore that thing out playing it in the car. Just at one point, I probably hadn't had the whole talk memorized. But my takeaway from there is he talked about a point in there about this poker chip theory of life.
Hmm.
If you're in a place where you have low self-esteem and you feel that you don't have anything to offer and you're playing poker, how many chips do you think you have in front of you? Now, if you're that person who has lots of self-esteem, you're pretty confident what you do, there's opportunities, there's things that you can do, you've got that poker chip pile pretty high.
Hmm.
So you're a little more willing to play, you're a little bit more
Hmm.
willing to engage, do different things. And so when he used that as an analogy, I kept thinking back about how could I be more engaged in my life in the other
Hmm.
aspects, not just in my personal or my business life, but how can I be more engaged in emotionally? I had lots of emotional work to do with, and that abandonment and separation piece was
Hmm.
so difficult. And I hardly saw my children for probably 5 years because of all the struggle that I was going through.
Hmm.
And so when you realize and start to recognize that there's things happen in your life to lead you towards things that you need to learn, and
Hmm.
you're willing to lean into that, then good things happen. And so
Hmm.
I had probably a good 2+ decades of lots of personal growth. I took some training, certified in NLP and timeline and
Wow.
emotional intelligence. I did a bunch of stuff. But then I almost lost my second marriage, because while you take all the courses you want and do all the training that you want, if you never implement anything,
Yeah.
if there's just a binder that sits on the shelf, if you're not truly engaging and utilizing the skills that you're learning, then it's about as worthless as not even taking the class.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was grateful enough that my wife, still my wife, gave me an opportunity to show myself first, the kind of man that she saw who I was. And if I was willing to do that work, she was willing to stick it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a key point there. She was willing to stick it out. That meant that any given day, she could have just said, enough, I'm done. We're through. But she didn't do that because she wanted to see, she didn't want to be another statistic, and she wanted to see if I could do that work. And it really started me implementing these things, implementing the strategies that I have, really looking at how these limiting beliefs, the frameworks I had put on different aspects of my life, whether that being about relationship, and somebody's only going to love me, if I'm showing them that, if I'm doing things for them all the time. Well, as a people pleaser, as many of us guys are, we find out pretty quick, if you're paying attention anyways, that's really not what your wife is looking for, your spouse, your partner is looking for. She's not looking for another child to raise. She's looking for a partner, somebody who's equal with her, who's willing to have conversations, the challenging ones, to engage in life, and to do that is instead of being yes dear and not standing up or having any backbone. And so as we started to work through that, it was really different for us, because that's not what we were used to as a couple. We had trained each other how life was, even as frustrating as it was for us. But the moment we started to do that work, life just opened up for us. Sorry, I'll go let you.
No, that's okay. But just at the very beginning of it, when you were doing the work and you were implementing these changes, was that a little bit strange in your relationship? Like, I mean, because all of a sudden, the paradigm has shifted and it's a completely different relationship almost. And I would think that that would be a little bit awkward and difficult.
Oh, it was more than a little bit awkward, and it was very difficult. Basically, we just burned the old relationship to the ground. We just said, we have to be more than just new people. We have to have a different relationship, a different foundation to build on. We can't build on the old foundation. And so while we said that, our habits and our behaviors were so ingrained to what it used to be, that when we started to have conversations, and so I'd come across a training called Crucial Conversations. Now, it's used mostly in business, but it works so great in personal relationships as well. And what it does is helps put a framework around how to have conversations about, what's the intention moving forward, which I really like. How can I express myself from my perspective, not pointing the finger? And how do I ultimately create space for her to be able to play in that? And so one of the things I coach guys is that if you haven't had a crucial or a challenging conversation with your partner, it's probably not the best idea to take the most pressing thing or the biggest thing on your plates. Start with something small. Start with something that isn't going to ruin everything. And then preface your conversation with, my wife's name's Kim, and be like, Kim, I have something I really want to talk about. It's been on my mind for a little bit, and I'm not sure if I'm going to share it very well, but if you just give me the honor of just hearing what I have to say, just allow me to say it and have it come out, then can we have a conversation about this? And she knows, and the first time I said that, of course, it's all like, well, now is he going to leave? Like, is he going to give me the big A-bomb? And when, and if you pay attention, my emotional intelligence training, has taught me to pay attention to body language and watching. And so as I could see some of that color drain out of her face, I assured her this isn't about ending anything. It's just, I want to practice talking about things that are bothering me, that I would really like to share. And then I just shared, and she struggled with, like, wow, like, I didn't know that this was bothering you, and this has been bothering you for how long? And so now we found ourselves going back in time a bit. But if it's only something like taking out the garbage, or like, my wife loves to leave stuff wherever, right? And so I think she has about a dozen reading glasses in the house. And I always get the question, Have you seen my reading glasses? Okay, if well, honey, if they're not on your head, let's go try a couple of different rooms, probably where it's at. But to have that conversation, right? And to go, well, how long has this been bothering you? Well, since you've been wearing reading glasses, really. But it's just as we're doing right now. We can chuckle about it, and then because really that conversation isn't about her. The conversation was, I was getting frustrated because my perception is that she's not organized. Is she not organized, or is it me that's not organized? And I feel that I could be better organized. And what
Mm,
could I do? And then when I recognized as we had the conversation that this is really all about me,
mhm.
and why am I putting so much energy into this? And is it really that important? Then we could just let it go. Now, Kimmy's a little better managing her reading glasses. But the point of it is that we started with something small. We could giggle
Mhm,
about it. Wasn't going to ruin our relationship, but we
mhm,
had a starting point, a launching pad
mhm,
to
mhm,
practice having conversations that in the past I would have been very uncomfortable having.
mhm.
And I think that's really key for guys.
Well, I had to laugh because this is a conversation that happens in our house a lot. Where are my glasses? And of course, I have several pair of different reading glasses for different occasions, and my husband only has one. So his is typically, where are my glasses and where is my phone? So this is a conversation that I think I can relate to, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners can as well.
100%. And while we're chuckling at it, like I said, it's a great way to get into conversation and really
Mhm,
dive a little deeper about it,
mhm,
and work at finding out, well, what is
mhm,
it about that. And when we started to
mhm,
ask why, what is it about me not having my glasses, what does it bother you up for? And then I could just say, well, it's because it just seems so unorganized, and I don't like being unorganized. Oh, so it's I don't like being unorganized.
mhm,
So why don't you like being unorganized, Al? Well, then I don't feel like I'm accomplishing as much, all dude type stuff that we think
mhm,
about, right? And then we
mhm,
recognize, okay, well, it's okay. Maybe there is a strategy
mhm.
to put in place for that can help to make sure that there's some glasses around. She has them for her at her beck and call.
Mhm.
But we have the best part of it is that we both got a little deeper appreciation for each other.
Well, not only that, if you know where the glasses are and you solve this problem, you have a solution, that makes it a little bit easier to go to the next level. Make it a little bit more challenging than, you leave your glasses all over the house.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so that way you can just take those little baby steps without going for the most challenging thing that's facing you, because that could blow up in your face, I would imagine, pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we talk about in our work as well is, when you get into any really serious relationship, there's going to be three areas that we have to, three. I call it really the three-legged stool, but it's you have to be on the same page and have at least an understanding of where both couples are, or both people are, when it comes to sex, money, and faith.
Mm,
Doesn't mean that you have to be exactly the same. What it means is, do I have a complete understanding about what my partner thoughts and feelings are around these three key things? Because those are where the big conversations are going to happen. Those
mhm,
are going to be the things that, as couples and as men, that we need to be able to have those conversations and know how to approach it. So when I talk about the big ones, it's those three that I ask them not to really dive into until you've had some practice
mhm,
with some of the
mhm,
other stuff. Because opening one of those, unless you've had a bit of practice and you have some strategy around it, because my experience has been that anytime we've opened those up, it can get pretty intense
mhm,
emotionally, and so we have a safe word for it. It gives us an opportunity to know, okay, this is a little too much right now for me, and I
mhm,
need a break. And so either one of us can use that safe word, and then we know that it's okay. We just need a bit of time before we can come back and re-engage in it. And sometimes that re-engagement happens in the same day. Other times it's the next day. But we communicate about that piece. We communicate about when it's okay to re-engage, and then to continue the process. And it may be a conversation that has to happen over multiple phases, because
Mhm.
you're not going to necessarily eat that elephant all at once. I
Mhm.
think that's it. Those are kind of skills that are really important, that as couples, to really, for us to learn how to develop, because it just saves so much more. In the
Mhm.
end, you know, our problems come with us wherever we go. And if there's challenges and problems in the relationship, how are you? I always ask, how am I showing up? What can I do differently? I'll own my bit, my half, my side of the line. What could I do? And then as long as I'm clear and solid on how I can show up, then at least now I can have that conversation from that standpoint, with my partner.
I'm going to segue just a little bit because when you're talking about, I mean, this is just triggering a lot of like little bits and pieces about your bio and your history,
Yeah.
because I did pick up, what was it? You said that there are 3 ways we learn wisdom.
Yes.
Do you want
Absolutely.
do you want to address
There's,
that for us?
yeah, for sure. So there are 3 ways to learn wisdom. The bitterest way to learn it is through experience.
Mm.
And so why is it bitter? Well, think about the experiences we've had in life. You can learn things when things go well, but are you really paying attention when it's going
Mm.
well? Probably not. But when things go awry, things aren't working for you, that experience is there to teach you something. There's something that's off. You're not in alignment with something, and it's an
Mhm.
opportunity for you to learn and gain some wisdom. My
Mhm.
definition of wisdom is the constant state of unlearning.
Mm.
And when we come from a perspective of remembering that, it's the old adage of the glass half full or the half empty. If I come in and my glass is always full, what am I having opportunity to learn? But if I come from a perspective of unlearning, then I can look for opportunities to pick something out. So the most challenging way, the bitterest way to learn or to gain wisdom is through experience. Now, the easiest way to do that is to do it through imitation. And I think of my time working in the Culinary Olympics. A lot of the skills that I learned to do that work was imitation of watching my mentors do work and how they crafted their pieces and how they put things together. What was the process, the steps that they used? And so it's an opportunity for you to imitate or model is another way to think of it. And
Mhm.
that's really the easiest way for us to do that work. Now, the noblest way is to do it on with reflection. So you may have had experience that are years ago, weeks ago, when you didn't get an opportunity to really think about that experience. Well, now's a great opportunity for you to do that work and to go back. That's where shadow work comes in. That's where some of
Mhm.
this reflection comes into play. And it gives you an opportunity to replay that scenario with a greater sense of perspective, because hopefully for you the intensity of that experience has lessened enough that it gives you the ability to have a really healthy reflection.
Mhm.
And so I think of those as the 3 most powerful ways that we can gain wisdom. And if we're paying attention and implementing any one of those 3, you're going to gain so much knowledge in such a short period of time.
Mhm. Are those things that you pass on to the guys that you work with, as far
Yeah,
as, gaining wisdom, gaining insight, especially the self-awareness and introspection, which I think it might be a little more challenging for men at first. I think women are a lot better at it because we're always trying to, look into everything because that's what we
yeah.
do. That's how we're made. But is that a challenge for the guys to do that?
It is if they're left on their own. And so
Mm.
what we spent the last 3 years doing is, with every lesson plan, everything that I would create, within there, I spent the majority of my time thinking about researching what are the best questions that I
Mm.
can ask that will pull out from them
Mhm.
something that they hadn't thought of. And so whenever we're looking at doing any of this work on wisdom, like wisdom is
Mhm.
such a big topic, but if we want to think about it,
Mhm.
what wisdom can we gain? What wisdom can I gain from my experience of going through bankruptcy?
Mhm.
Well, there's lots of financial pieces in that. And it's not just about the mechanics of financial, but it's also the beliefs around that. And
Mhm.
so structuring a set of questions that, really dives into, well, what do you believe about money? Well, I
Mhm.
believe money is hard to get. It doesn't, my father always said it doesn't grow on trees.
Mhm.
And when you have this lack of mindset, we can struggle with how we handle our finances. And so the work that I do with the guys is really about finding, and we do that, to this day, is what are those questions, that not the yes and no answers, right? Those closed loop, but those open questions that really gets them to dive into
Mhm.
what it is that we're working on. And so I think when we do that, it gives them a framework for them to work
Mhm.
from, and they get a lot more success. And so on the membership site, it's really awesome, because on the back end I get to see everybody's answers that no one else necessarily gets to see, and
Mhm.
it's really powerful to see how
Mhm.
deep and these guys are digging
Mhm.
in really coming forward with what it is that we're working on. So
Mhm.
that would be the framework I would use for sure.
Well, that's great. It just, again, it just makes me so happy just to know that there's something like that out there and that men are able to open up and do that kind of work. But it does raise a question, because I would imagine that it's a little bit intimidating at first. I mean, I'm sure
Mm.
you get guys that are pretty guarded, and
Yeah.
they have their little armor around them, and I know, because I think I have a lot more masculine energy than I ever thought, because I understand that I'm the same way.
Mm.
So just getting them to open up, that must be so difficult for them.
Yeah, it's incredibly challenging for new guys joining the group and coming in, and it's part of the reason why I want them to have at least 2 sessions with us, two
Mhm.
meetings, and before they commit to doing anything,
Mhm.
because they have to. First off, I want them to be comfortable within the environment. And
Mhm.
one of the ways that I found that seems to be pretty successful, and the guys that have been around me long enough now recognize that when we model how to be in that meeting, it makes it easier for those guys. So I really ask the guys that have been around for a bit to really share when we get into
Mhm.
the sharing section of it, and we're talking about diving into the topic, is to just be as vulnerable as you can. You've got the practice. Just go in there and talk about it. Just talk about whatever it is that is really on your heart,
Mhm.
and that helps that crack it open. Doesn't mean all of a sudden now these guys are
Mhm.
taking 40-minute monologue to join our group, but they see that you can see them open up a little bit, and so they'll share
Mhm.
a little bit of the story.
Mhm.
We probably have about 10%, but 10%
Mhm.
is better than nothing.
Mhm.
And one of the things that guys find out real quick in my group is that I don't allow any wallflowers in the meeting. So I will
Mhm.
call upon them, and I let them know before they come to the meeting that
Mhm.
you're going to be. It's very interactive. It's participative. It's the only way that we learn and grow. And so I will ask you to speak. Now you can pass, but I want you to be really mindful about why you're passing,
Mhm.
and just share enough of what you're comfortable with. If you
Mhm.
do that, I guarantee you're going to get way more out of the group than you will by sitting on the sidelines. And for the most part, maybe not the first meeting, but by the second one, they're starting to share. And again, it may not be the whole story, and it starts
Mhm.
to unravel as they get more comfortable. And that's really the goal. The goal
Mhm.
isn't to have people be so afraid, because this is the first time that they're talking about stuff that's really important to them. And the
Mhm.
last thing I need them to do is come in and then go, well, that was a crappy experience.
Right.
I'm out of here. Like, what are these guys trying to do? And so it's a balance between that nurture side of it, but also being compassionately accountable for
Mhm.
who we are. And so I think that we've been pretty successful so far.
I had this image in my mind when you first started talking about it, because all I could see are these, new members coming in, and I had this vision of like being in a classroom and running to the very last row and sitting in the back so nobody sees them, or hey, I'm trying out a new church for the first time. I'm going to be in the last pew and closest to the door so I can make a fast exit if I'm uncomfortable. So I really give them a lot of credit for even having the courage to take that step and to join the group. I mean, that has got to be a very uncomfortable and vulnerable experience, but to have that kind of courage just really speaks to their character.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we always say to everyone, anybody, anytime anyone's sharing, it's just that we honor them, we see them,
Mhm.
and I thank them for their presence. And when we speak to each other like that as men, we don't hear those words. Like my father never spoke to me like that. I don't think he's no longer with us. I don't think my dad ever told me that he loved us. But
Mhm.
we just knew, like you just knew.
Mhm.
I never had to worry about a roof over my head, no matter how tough it was growing up. There was a roof over my head, there was food on the table, all of our needs were met.
Mhm.
It's just that, the era that my father grew up in, it just wasn't, he didn't know how, once we were big enough to be off his lap,
Mhm.
we were kind of like on our own, like, okay, buddy, you've got to figure it out. That was weekends on the farm, and, he's busy doing all that work, and we're just trying to stay out of trouble. And so
Mhm.
we don't learn how to do that as men.
Mhm.
And, today it's a great opportunity for us to practice and learn that. And, just think about how much better, the family unit will be when we have both parents being able to come together and put that energy into it. So
Well, and so much better for the community and for society in
yeah,
general. And the fact that you're helping each other actually just strengthens those bonds. I think it's just great.
yeah, absolutely. It's why we call our group Band of Brothers.
And that's what I was good. That was the next thing I was going to ask because I know, how did you come up, first of all, with the awakened, what is it? Let me see, hang on, awakened man movement.
Yeah. So I was thinking about lots of different ways to, what could this be? Did a bit of Google search, see what else is out there, and then I thought about my journey and what has really been the story of my life's journey, and it's really been an unfolding, a revealing of all this stuff. And I thought about, well, it's folding, it's unreally, I'm really being awakened, like I'm waking up. And so the idea of being an awakened man, recognize that
Mhm.
every day that more things for me to learn.
Mhm.
The never ending peeling of this onion of who we are as individuals. And so the idea of us being awakened men, that we recognize that we have many flaws, and yet with those flaws, we also recognize that we're doing our best to live as conscious, empowered men. And so that's where it came down to it. I am looking at it. I am considering a bit of a rebrand. There's a group of guys in the UK that have the same group name, and the Revolutionary Man podcast has really been picking up steam lately. So who knows? There might be a rebrand down the road
Mhm. Well, when there is, do contact me, let me know, and I will change that on the show notes so people can find you.
for sure.
Okay, and then the Band of Brothers came about.
Yeah, that was that starting that group of 10 that really helped me put together this group mentoring program. Was opportunity to get men together again. And I wanted to create this space because when my marriage was falling apart, and I reached out to a couple of really close buddies, they just didn't know how to support me. As a matter of fact,
Mm,
I was a bit shunned for a while because they were
mm,
concerned from their family and how I was going to impact that, or how we would be impacting their family. And so when that happened, and then my father-in-law, really not much longer after that, my father-in-law passed away, and he was like my best friend. He had he raised two daughters, and when I went by to check on him to see if he was okay, because some of us hadn't heard from him in a bit more than a day, and I found him that he had passed.
oh,
My heart
sorry.
just broke, and I
Oh,
did a little bit of grief counseling, and but what I found was that the stuff I needed to share, there was no other dudes in the room. I don't know. I didn't feel comfortable that people would understand what I'm trying to say. And so I thought to myself, no more will there ever be an opportunity for that a man doesn't have somewhere to go, that if they need to just spill their guts, that they can do that. There's no shame, there's no blame in our environment. You just do what you need to do. And I'm a big believer in it, it's probably better to do that in a men's group first before going home and doing that with your wife. Now, that may
mhm,
be controversial, and I know lots of guys, and I consider Kimmy to be my best friend too. However, coming up and showing up like a blubbering fool and not having your stuff together isn't the best way to go about it. So come to a place where there's no shame and no judgment. We don't really we have skin in the game, but we have a different kind of skin in the game.
mhm,
Let us help you work through that so that you can go and be coherent
mhm,
to share your emotions, so that it's not overwhelming for her, and you don't come across. And if you need to be, as men, we tend to lean towards anger as our first emotion. And so think about that. If you're dealing with something and that's how you're going to show up at home, it's probably not the best way to go. But if you can come into a place where men can help you with that and help you get through that stage of it at least, then you can go back and truly share what's really on your heart, because underneath that anger is a bunch of fear. There's a bunch of concerns about who you are and how you're showing up. And so do that in a different place, and then take to that next place where you're at. Now you can go and have the conversation and really share from the heart. And I guarantee you, if you did that, the connection that you will have just built, it would be even more solidified with your partner, versus coming home and having a blowout, or you fall apart. And I just struggle with that. I know that's maybe controversial, but it's what I believe in, and it's worked for the guys that I work with.
So then what made you decide to start a podcast?
Yeah, great. I just thought that there was an opportunity to get the message out about some of the work that I'm doing, but also to let guys know that we're not the only ones who are dealing with stuff. And what's a better way than to have guests on my show that can talk about my opening question is always about them sharing their hero's quest, their little time in life when they knew things had to change. And what did they do, and how did that shape them into the person they are today and the work that they do? And then we go from there, and I deal with 6 pillars of life pillars. It's in financial, emotional, spiritual, physical, professional, and our relationships. And so I look for experts and people who have information in those areas to talk about that, and talk about how are different ways that they've, from their hero's journey, and how they've been able to transfer that into this is what they're doing to manage this in the financial pillar, or emotionally. I had a great conversation with a guy on emotional intelligence. It was just phenomenal, the things that that I was learning. And so the podcast came about to help to provide that value for folks to get a sense of what it is that we do here with the Awakened Man, and it's an opportunity for them to check in and then check us out before taking that next step.
Okay, so this is a loaded question. Is there a book in your future?
My wife asks me that every other day. I think there
Great
will
minds
be.
think alike.
Yeah, I sure do. I think there will be. There's enough material right now that for sure a book could be put together. I've had this romantic idea of 35 years ago. I fell in love with Og Mandino and his book series. I don't know if you're familiar with Og's books, but Og's used to write these little executive style books, 5.5 by 6, right? Just short little books, 120 pages long. And the one that really stuck with me was the greatest salesman in the world. And it's just a fable, and Robin Sharma has really picked up that mantle now. Robin's books are a little longer and a little bigger, but Og Mandino really is the catalyst of that. And I had this vision of the same idea, this guy that goes on this journey. And we would touch on these 5 pillars that I have: purpose, identity, connection, living with a code of honor, and being in relationship or marriage, and writing a series on that. Something quick, little lessons. But Og really is like I said, he's kind of got I had this romantic idea that that's what the book would be all about. And so we'll see, maybe a little bit more prodding for my wife, and a little more diving into the limiting beliefs around writing. It's probably what I need to do.
Well, if you ever need a cheerleader, let me know, because I know you can do it. And I
I
figured
appreciate that.
there's probably not a book in you. I'm sure there are more than one.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Okay, so now last question. I promise. Okay. Go back to that time that everything was falling apart and you were losing it all.
Mm.
If you could have, at that time, looked into the future and saw yourself now, saw what you were doing, what would you have thought? What would you have said?
Man, that's an awesome question.
Thank you.
I would look at that future person and I go, finally, you're doing what you're meant to do.
Mm.
Finally. Now the question is, did I need to make all the decisions to get to where I am? And that I'm not necessarily sure I needed to. Although if I was to go back, there would probably be two or three things I would change differently. Just some decisions that ultimately led to the end of stuff.
Mhm.
But I think I would look forward and say, finally you're doing that,
Mm.
and and then to come back and please help me with, bring him along. It's kind of like it's not inner child work; it's inner adult work,
Ooh, I
right?
like that. That's
And
great.
to go back and bring him forward
Yeah.
to show him that man, that's an outstanding question. I might have to steal that.
Be my guest.
Outstanding. Hopefully that answered it for you.
Oh, you did. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and I find that I do ask that to some of my guests who have like such compelling stories, and most of them, everybody does, but especially people who have come out of something that like a really dark time, and they're using that to not only heal themselves, but to help other people.
Yes.
And to me, that's the powerful and beautiful part of going through the crap in life that we go through is getting through it. Life is so much better at the other end. And looking back, if we could see as we were in the middle of it and of all this muck and heavy stuff, what would we have said if we could have seen ourselves in the future doing what we're doing now? I just find that a very fascinating and reflective perspective of looking at things.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think what's going in my mind is really the idea of just being purposeful, right? I think the other thing as I think about this some more, I'll probably be on my mind now for a few days,
Hmm.
is the pay attention now. What can I learn in this moment? What's happening? Not necessarily that things change, but what am I learning here right now?
Hmm.
How can I, what's happening? Because I think too many times in life that it's Groundhog Day for us, and we just repeat the same wash, rinse, repeat. And so
Hmm.
when we live from that boredom, then life gets to be, well, boring. But it's
Hmm.
also where lots of problems come from. That's where we start taking ourselves for granted. If you're in marriage and relationship, your partners for granted, your children, at
Hmm.
work, everything you start to do that slowly, subtly. That's actually pretty insidious. I mean, I think about it. But if, thinking onto your question even deeper, it would be about just pay attention. What can I learn in this moment? What's
Hmm.
happening right now that I can learn from? And not that every moment will have a learning piece, but I bet you at the end of the day, you probably learned a few things.
Mhm. I'm sure. I'm going to start doing that. I'm on a 3-year plan because I have a big birthday coming up in 3 years, 3 years. But it's like I want to embrace it the way I have embraced the other ones with zeros after it. And so it's like, I just want to make sure that I'm on my game. The one thing that really scares me, I never want to become complacent. I just
Mm-hmm.
don't ever want that. And so that's why I'm kind of creating this 3-year plan. So I'm going to put that in there.
Love
So
it.
thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We celebrate the ones with zeros as well. And both of us have, well, she'll get to that zero before me, just a little bit before me. But
Mhm.
having a plan to move forward, and how do we, again, it goes back to what do you aspire to become? How will you look? How does that person live that day? What are the thoughts
Mhm.
I'm thinking? What are the
Mhm.
actions I'm taking?
Mhm.
What am I doing? And start living that today.
Mhm.
Right? As I do that today, then you're assured to have that. But if we put it
Mhm.
off, I'll do it tomorrow. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Tomorrow never comes.
Yeah. And today's the best time to start. So,
Yeah.
Alan, how can people get a hold of you? Where can they find you? And if they wanted to connect with you, how do they go about doing that? Because I know a lot of people listening right now to the episode are going to want to contact you. I do have quite a few men that listen to the show. I
Yeah.
have a lot of women, and they might be thinking, maybe my husband or boyfriend could use this work.
Absolutely. The best place to find everything about me is go to my website, theawakenedman.net. When you go to the website, at the very top of the page, there's going to be a button there. It's a clarity consultation. Click that button and then you get a 30-minute consultation with me. Guess what? It's going to be longer than 30. So I encourage you to click it. I'm looking to provide as much value as I can. But also what's newly just put up there is there's going to be a little pop-up. And the pop-up is a workbook. It's called Setting the Compass. It's an opportunity for you to reflect on the last 12 months of how things have happened, your life has transpired, writing not necessarily a purpose statement, but a headline. So it was in the paper, what would it say about the last 12 months? And then I'm going to ask you to do the same thing for the upcoming 12 months, where how you just show up in different parts of your life. So it's a free download for you, a little workbook opportunity to do a little bit of work, get a sense of what kind of style that we do here at the Awakened Man. And on those pages, you'll find all my others for my socials. I'm on Instagram. On Pinterest and YouTube with the podcast.
Okay, and all those links are in the show notes. So before we sign off, do you have like one final pearl of wisdom that wisdom, there's that word again, that you want to share with the audience before we leave?
Yeah, I think for me, if I was to say anything, is to remember that today is an opportunity for us to rewrite our history. Our book is always being written. Today, at the end of today, is this chapter. If you're happy with how things went, great, make a note of that. If you're not as thrilled about some things, make a note of that as well. Because tomorrow you get an opportunity to write the next chapter of your life. And so write the best chapter that you can each and every day.
Perfect. Alan, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. It's been great.
Awesome, outstanding. Thank you so much, Cheryl.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. And please do share this episode with everyone you know, all your lady friends and your guy friends, the important men in your lives. And remember to support them and treat them with respect because, all this man bashing, it just doesn't sit well with me. And I think that we're just doing our society and our relationships a lot of harm if we do end up going down that path. So just be positive, be healthy, be happy, be strong. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.